Hello and welcome to Theory to Practice Proposal, Blended Learning. My name is Scott Hargraves and thank you for listening. Blended learning is the learning style or method that I chose to go into for this. And for part one, let's talk about what is blended learning. Well, I had that same question and I was less than satisfied in the answer I was able to find. So it's a little bit slippery, the definition, but we'll get through it. Don't you worry. I was not able to find any universally acceptable definition. Very inconsistent from source to source. Some of the examples that you'll get if you Google it and look at that, you'll find hybrid, which falls under the heading of blended. So does flipped classroom, or you'll just see the word blended, but without definition. But looking at multiple different sources, I was able to kind of triangulate a consensus and come up with what I consider to be a good working definition of what we mean by blended learning. There are three parts in my definition of blended learning that I share with some other people who have actually published it. Part one is that blended learning is, at least in part, online learning with, and this is important, some element of student control. I'll circle back to that. Blended learning is also partially face-to-face. So we have our online or remote learning. We have our face-to-face learning. The third part is bringing those two things together, integrating what we're done in each of those parts to reach our objectives, to culminate in combining both of those things and actually mastering the subject. Now, I mentioned the student control for the online learning. It's considered to be very important for the student to have some element of control, such as what time of day. If it's asynchronous, they observe them. If they watch a little bit here, a little bit there, so they're just kind of grazing, or they decide to binge watch and procrastinate and watch everything at the last minute once it's all published, or some combination of those two things. Or it could be the pace, it could be the time of day, or it could be the size of the bites that they take. But it's important for them to not, I'm going to use an analogy of a radio broadcast. It's important that the information not be consumed by the student, or not the student not having an option other than as an old-time radio broadcast where, let's say, your show was broadcast at a certain time on a certain day only. There was no way to record it. There was no way to shift the time. There was no way to, there'd be no way to pause or rewind or slow down or speed up. It would be, here it is at this time on this day in this place, take it or leave it. So that would not work for blended learning. So why should we even consider this? What's it offer? Well, it is adaptive. Students can do deep dives if they want to. They can stay at one place until mastery is achieved with guidance and support. Competence-based learning, again, that's scaffolding, that's mastering one level before moving on to the next. It is less geographically binding. This is important right now with COVID. And what I mean by this is that, for example, is they don't have to be physically at a school, at a fixed location. They don't have to be in a brick and mortar building. So a lot of schools have adapted out of necessity in response to COVID, adapted to this, whether it's a matter of, your different groups where you're, whether it's part of the day or part of the week. Half the school's there Monday, Tuesday, no one's there Wednesday, the other half is there Thursday, Friday, something like that. It does allow for flexibility in that matter. And when we get to my actual proposal, I have some other reasons for that being important as well. Now, there are some different examples of designs that fall under the heading of of blended learning. You've probably heard of some of these, but let's just review a few of them anyway. We have station rotation, in which the students rotate through stations on a fixed schedule. At least one of the stations is being an online learning station. Very common in elementary school. This doesn't have to be a change in physical location. It could just be, okay, now we're done with, I don't know, sorry, I'm in higher ed. We're done with reading. Everybody take out your tablets, and we're going to do our online learning at this time. Now, lab rotation is very similar. Students rotate through a station on a fixed schedule, but the difference here is there is a physical change in location when it's time for the online learning. Usually it's a dedicated computer lab. It allows for staggering of resources, so different groups could use the lab exclusively at different times. There is, of course, the flipped classroom that we all should be familiar with, where the learning takes place outside of the class meeting time, but the class still meets their face-to-face time, and that's used for teacher-guided practice, for working on projects, group projects, for clarification and correction, for one-on-one counseling, remediation, that type of thing. There's the flex model, which gives the students a high degree of control. It's essential that they have online component for this part, where the students essentially are on their own, work through the curriculum, and the instructors are only there as on an as needed or as requested basis. There are a few others, but for the sake of time, we're not going to go into those. Now, the theory to practice proposal. What I'm thinking of implementing. For some background, I plan on implementing it in my current teaching assignment. For those of you who don't know, I am at California University of Pennsylvania, and I teach in the Physical Therapist Assistant Program. It is a 2-year, 72-credit Associate of Applied Science degree program. We have a cap of 26 students that we're able to take in our technical phase, which would be the semesters 2 through 5. Semester 1 is open to everybody, and at the end of that semester, students apply for one of the 26 seats. Okay, now right now we are following a traditional university schedule. All of our didactic and all our experiential components, our lectures and our labs, if you will, are in separate sections. We have to go through our central scheduling through the registrar's office, and it's distributed based on instructor availability, physical plant, classroom availability, that type of thing. We work on a 15-week semester for fall and spring. Anyway, summer's a little bit different. So an example, I'm going to use my neuro course. Full name of the course is PTA 210, Physical Therapy Interventions in Neurologic Impairments. You don't have to remember that. We're just going to call it neuro. Which consists, it's a 4-credit course, 3 hours of lecture per week, and 2 hours of lab per week. The 3 hours of lecture are usually distributed in our 50-minute hours over 3 different days. Usually it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but sometimes there's been some variations in that as well. But it has always been in the 15 times that I've taught it, it's been in on 3 different days. 2 hours of lab, those 2 hours are together in a block, 1 day per week. So that's our current model. What the change that I'm going to propose is that the lecture will still have the same contact time, we'll still have that 3 hours of lecture each week, but it'll be delivered remotely. Now, some combination of synchronous and asynchronous, or students may have the option. You could watch it when it's live, or you could view it later. The lab, so with the lecture, so there wouldn't necessarily be that need for the physical space, right? Need to find a classroom, need to clear everybody's schedule so they're available at that time, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever time it happens to be. for an hour. So we've cleared up the need for some physical space in there, and we've also did some temporal cleaning. Now the lab, what I'm thinking here, based on some other programs that I've seen in my work as an on-site reviewer for our accrediting body, is big chunk of block time. Rather than that 2 hours a week, which is not really enough time when you get through the kibitzing and the setup and the cleanup to do a whole lot of anything. With our 15-week semester, if we held the labs only every third week, so weeks 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, but we'd have it for the same time. So in week 3, instead of having a lab for 2 hours like we normally would on a weekly basis, we're going to have 6 hours of lab. So that'll be all of the time for week 1, 2, and 3. 6-hour block. That could be good or bad. I think it might be good. So we'd have that large block of time there, but only doing it every 3 weeks. So some possible benefits to this. Through the didactic portion, it would allow the students to proceed at their own pace with some constraints. We have a 15-week semester. We have objectives we have to meet. We have proficiencies that the students have to demonstrate competency in before they're able to successfully pass the class. So maybe check a series of short-term goals and objectives, maybe every 5 weeks, to keep them on track. They couldn't just screw around and then try and do everything in week 13. That would not be good. It is possible, there is some evidence, that block practice helps retention, helps acquisition and retention of skills. So we'd have those 6-hour blocks of time to really practice away at them. That wouldn't be enough. There'd have to be practice in the off time as well, but that exists now. Students have access to lab facilities and whatnot, and are expected to practice the skills that they learned during laboratory time on their own time. Now, there might be some geographic. I said I was going to loop back to this as well. First, let's talk about how it might benefit the students. Well, it might benefit students who are not currently students. For example, let's say someone wants to come to our program to be a PTA, but they're sharing care of a family member, or they have a job that the schedule, they need the income, and they're too far away to commute 4 or 5 days a week, so they just give it up. If we say you only have to come to campus every third weekend, or if we do it during the week, which I think I'm liking the sound of better, let's say Thursday, Friday, Saturday, split the difference. So that's if you come in early on, or midday on Thursday, you got to spend Thursday night and Friday night. You could drive back home on Saturday. So that's 5 times during the semester you have to pay for lodging for 2 nights, 10 nights, as opposed to having to pay for an apartment or a dorm room for the entire 15 weeks. And having that flexibility, only having to be there for 2.5 days every 3 weeks, maybe you could work that out with your job, or maybe you could arrange to your caregiving schedule to cover that amount of time where you might not otherwise. Now, geographically, it may benefit the program because we might have access to an untapped pool of potential students to whom this type of program may be appealing. And there may be some economic ones. One, I mentioned the students could save on housing, lodging, and 2, economic, being self-interest here. It may boost our numbers. It may enhance our applicant pool, give us a higher quality of students, increase our coffers, right? We've got a full cohort of 26. That's great. Everybody's paying their tuition, and we could get back to the days when it used to be a little bit competitive and we had to turn away qualified students. We haven't seen that for a few years, but we may, casting a wider net, we may have a better harvest where we could do that and make our program a little bit more viable. Now, some possible risk. There may be some decreased enrollment. There were 2 students just this spring that declined. We had 26 selected. We had 2 that they gave the reason of they just could not deal with any remote classes anymore. The ones I'm teaching this semester are remote. Not all of them are, but they just, after last semester being fully remote delivery, they decided that was just not something they wanted to continue with. If we ever go back fully to face-to-face, they'll be more than happy to come back and reapply. So there is that chance. Some students are just averse to online learning. There may also be poorer retention of hands-on skills because of the block practice. For some people, that works much better. For other people, the distributed practice works better as far as acquiring and retaining skills. Now, there may also be some increased time demands on faculty, as Dr. McGinty, I'm sure, can attest. The setup, well, we all can. We've all been doing this. Pre-recording lectures and developing materials, the concentrated lab times. This might put some increased demands on faculty, so that might be a negative as well. We are a unionized faculty, so there might be some sticky parts of the collective bargaining agreement that I'm not aware of that could be unearthed if we choose to go forward with this, but we'll see. I wish to thank you if you have listened to all 17 and a quarter minutes of